Good morning and welcome to our introduction to the book of Esther as we continue our journey of going through the Bible in a year. We come to this book of Esther, and Esther is one of only two books in the Bible named after women. Can you guess the other one? We've already done it. I'll give you a moment. And if you haven't worked it out already or can't remember, it is Ruth. So the book of Esther, the book of Ruth are the only two books in the Bible that are named after women. It is a story about an orphan who is descended from prisoners of war, who rises up to become the queen of the most powerful empire on the planet at that particular time. So a real kind of rags to riches story, and it's a story that you couldn't make up. You know, if you were writing a Hollywood film, you wouldn't make up the story of Esther. There's some amazing stuff that happens in this story. Interestingly, it is a story where God is not mentioned once. Not once is God mentioned in the story, but kind of there is this feeling that God's purpose is working its way through in there. Why is it included in the Bible if God isn't mentioned at all? Well, maybe it's included in there as an encouragement that there have been several attempts to wipe out the Jewish people, and none of them have worked. And you know, God's people throughout history have always come through those times of intense persecution. We celebrate Holocaust Memorial Day, or we mark Holocaust Memorial Day every year, and a shout out to Jack Fielding, our volunteer, one of our volunteers who tirelessly puts together every year our material for Holocaust Memorial Day, is our ambassador for that, and I know how much Jack puts into that work so that we can mark and remember what was for the Nazis the final solution to the Jewish problem, what they believed was the final solution to the Jewish problem, which was the extermination of all Jewish people, and the death camps that were across Europe, and the ghettos and so on. Truly awful things that happened within the living memory of some of us in the life here of the church. And there was a similar level of persecution. You know, you have in this story Haman, who was the kind of prototype Gestapo camp commandant figure, in terms of being the plotter who was going to orchestrate the destruction of the Jews. You have some amazing stories that happen in this, unlikely heroes that rise up from amongst the people. You've got Mordecai, you've got Esther herself, who, you know, there's this incredible party at the beginning of the story of Esther that kind of would out Hollywood. You know, this party lasted for 180 days. Have you ever been? Well, none of us have ever been. I won't even ask the question. None of us have ever been to a party that lasted 180 days. You know, I turned 40 a few months ago, and we had like a week of different events over that period of time, but 180 days of partying. And then when that party finished, there was another week that they added on to that party. So that's how it begins, you know, this massive excess. And then there's a queen that's needed to be chosen from amongst the kind of courtesans and concubines in the palace. And Esther becomes queen, and then this plot is discovered. You know, Mordecai, Esther's uncle, discovers a plot to try and kill the Jews, and he says to Esther this wonderful phrase. And if you've heard a phrase from the book of Esther, it's probably this phrase that you heard. He says to Esther, maybe you've become queen for such a time as this. Maybe you've become queen for such a time as this. In other words, what are the chances? And this is what I mean by God, moving behind the scenes. What are the chances of a Jewish queen becoming queen at the same time that there was a plot to exterminate the people group that she came from? So that's there in the background, and you have a real mixture of events from the way in which it unfolds and the story, how the plot is uncovered and the victim becomes the hero, how the executor of the plan is executed, and then you have this awful kind of scene of vengeance and retribution at the end of the story where thousands of people are killed, that sits really uneasily with us, and the establishment then of a Jewish festival, minor Jewish festival of Purim, which celebrates the deliverance of the people from that plot to exterminate them as well. And then a happy ending, which is always nice in the story to have as well. But I guess the question for us is, how do we hold on to, particularly in the latter part of the story where there's this vengeance and retribution by the Jewish people against their enemies, how does that sit with us? Does that trouble us at all? Given the nature of the plot, does it trouble us in light of what we see in the world today, in the way that Israel is behaving towards its enemies? How do we hold that in light of what Jesus says in Matthew 25? I just want to read to you just 6 verses. Matthew 5 verses 43 to 48. Jesus said, "You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Not even the tax collectors do the same. And if you greet only your brother and sister, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." How do we weigh the actions of retribution at the end of the book of Esther with those words of Jesus? How do we weigh what's happening in the Middle East at the moment against those words of Jesus, to love your enemy and to pray for those who persecute you? The story of Esther is a fascinating story, full of drama, full of subtext, and I pray that it's one that, even though it doesn't mention God, I pray that you find him as you read those words and as you reflect on those words of Jesus as well. God bless you.